Hello, and welcome to another episode of PodcastDX, the show that brings you interviews with people just like you whose lives were forever changed by a medical diagnosis. I'm Lita Thomas. I don't normally do all this spiel, but I'm a retired U.S. Army major and a recreational therapist. I am a co-host of PodcastDX.
And I'm Ron Rispoli, a professional in the disability field with more than 25 years of experience. I have to tell you, unfortunately, Jean Marie will not be joining us today, but collectively, we are the crew of PodcastDX. Today, we bring you a powerful conversation about what happens after military service. When the war is over, but the fight for care has just begun. Our show today is a special one. We are welcoming back three of our previous guests. Mark Frerichs, who hopefully will be joining us shortly, Kristal Kent, and Brian Talley. Good afternoon, and thank you to all of you for joining us today.
Mark, do we have you?
Hey.
And Kristal, you're up.
I am up. Okay, well, hello, everybody. Thank you for having me on yet again. What is this, my fourth time?
I think so. A frequent flyer.
We're going to put her on the payroll.
Yep. And Brian.
Yes, ma'am. How are you?
Doing really great. Thank you for joining us, guys. Our main guest today is Mark. He was a U.S. Navy veteran and a former Navy diver who became a government contractor and was held hostage by the Taliban for over 2 years. He was released in 2022 after intense negotiations and international coverage. Mark's story represents one of the most extreme challenges a return veteran can face. But his post-captivity experience with the Veterans Administration system is, unfortunately, more common than you might think.
Joining us as well are two respected voices in the veteran community. Kristal Kent, an Army veteran and co-founder of Veteran Voices for Fibromyalgia, and Brian Talley, a Marine Corps veteran who experienced VA medical negligence and became the namesake of the Brian Talley VA Employment Transparency Act, which is a piece of legislation aimed at increasing VA accountability.
I'd like to thank all three of you for joining us in today's show. Although we have spoken to each of you separately in the past, Kristal more often than not, I believe that there's strength in numbers and hope with the input of all of you, we can continue to draw attention to this most important topic. Mark, first of all, and once again, welcome home. Thank you for joining us, and let's begin with your background. Can you tell us a little bit about your time in the U.S. Navy and your path from working on an aircraft carrier to becoming a Navy diver and finally to your position as a government contractor?
Yeah, I was in the Navy. I graduated high school in 1980 and joined the Navy in 1981 during the Reagan years. A good time to be in the military because they were putting a lot of money into spec war and all sort of stuff. Landed on a carrier for 2 years, learned what the fleet sailing was all about. I enlisted for 5 years for extended training, put my hat in the ring to be a Navy diver, made it through the school, and for 3 years, Navy diver. Got out, got my engineering degree, and back then it was in between the Vietnam era, 76. So there wasn't the GI Bill, and there wasn't the new GI Bill. I was in between, and it helped me. It got me through. Got out, got married, lived in Virginia Beach for 10 years, moved back to the Midwest about 2000. About the same time when 9/11 happened, and I was already a rock and a rolling contractor, building houses and doing all that stuff. And it was a good time for building. 9/11 hit, saw an opportunity there, 2006, I went to work for KBR in Iraq. 2003, 2009, I was in Iraq, kind of got my feet wet of what, you know, what contracting's all about and all that. And that was an interesting time because Halliburton, all these other companies were had contracts, to provide services and whatnot for the troops. Um, so I kind of figured out the contract work, working for KBR. 2009, I went to Afghanistan as an independent contractor. Government liked what I did, and it's all about performance with them. And just built businesses, building the hearts and minds of the locals, getting back on track with American way of thinking up till my capture 2020.
So, Mark, you were captured in 2020 while working in Afghanistan, you just mentioned. For our listeners who might not know the full story, what actually were the circumstances that it led up to your capture?
To give a broad scope, I felt more secure than I was led to believe in the security of the country. I didn't know that as soon as we were evacuating these bases, the bad guys were taking them over. I had bad intel. Bagram, I was the king of sting of Bagram. I helped develop most of that. And I was in transport from Kabul to Bagram, and it was February, slippery road, and next thing I know, head-on collision um, with another vehicle, and uh, they saw that as an opportunity. Hey, we got a American here. Maybe we could do something with him. And 32 months later, I was released.
Wow. Well, that kind of experience is unimaginable for all of us. I mean, we've gone through the military. We think we've gone through it all, but really, your story is heartbreaking to realize that after you've done all your service, and then you try to use the education that you learned while you were in the military to make a civilian life for yourself. And I understand being a contractor has risks, but boy, that's a risk I would not wish on anybody.
Yeah, it's a progressive risk that you don't realize that you're involved with. I had good
Yeah, do you think that the training that you got in the Navy as a diver helped you survive mentally and emotionally during your capture?
Absolutely, absolutely. I went through that training. I'm 63 now. I went through that training when I was 20, and that endurance training and just getting through whatever it takes to go through to make it happen. Um, can do attitude. Um, it was a tough school. Um, we started out with 33. We ended up with 14. I went through the winter class, and thankfully I came from a cold environment, Chicago, and I had a pool in my backyard my entire life. So those two things got me through dive school. But yeah, once you get into that community, it's a whole different world. You're not in the fleet community anymore. Um, it's an elite society, and you're around guys. Training with SEAL team guys all the time, and going on missions with them. It it brought me to what I am at a young age.
Right.
I think had I not gone through that at a young age, I wouldn't be what I am today.
Certainly, certainly. You said you were held captive for 32 months. So when you were finally released in 2022 and you were brought home, what kind of support did you expect to receive from the VA or any federal programming?
Rolling back into it, I didn't know what my status was in the U.S. They had pulled out. Some of the activity I was involved with for Covert, sponsored by U.S. government. But you never know where you stand on something like this. You don't know if they're going to be on your side or whatever. Thankfully, everything rolled out cool. Tammy Duckworth, the senator from Illinois here, veteran, and you can look up her background. Incredible, just incredibly strong person.
Right.
She was able to move my status because I rolled into Iraq in Afghanistan as a civilian contractor.
Right.
Exactly.
And I think that's kind of been the loophole in all of this. Being a contractor, being a I think they're addressing this stuff now, but we're serving our country, at different capacity.
Correct.
Yeah, she was able to move my veteran status in the VA system to that of a returning veteran, which is very helpful. So,
Okay. All right.
I had already been diagnosed with PTSD 30 years prior to that, from my Navy time, diving on dead bodies and whatnot. It's got a little bit of, pings in your mind a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so she was able to move me up on the tier, and I'm near Hines VA here, which is very fortunate for me. It's just 45 minutes up the road, and yeah, I mean everything I've ever needed, they've provided. Certainly there's a list, there's a waiting list. Yeah, so my VA experience has been pretty good. I think how we want to roll this conversation is into.
Did you get VA assistance as soon as you returned then, or as soon as Senator Duckworth got you into the system? Were you able to get all the care that you needed at the VA at that point?
Yeah, absolutely. I was already in the system.
Brian, can you share your experience with the VA and what led you to advocate for change?
Yes, ma'am. Today is actually my 4-year, I call it my alive anniversary.
Oh.
April 30th.
Wow.
2016 is when they opened me up, Scripps Hospital in San Diego, and then they found the surprise that they were looking for bone-eating staph infection that was aggressively eating me alive from the inside out for 4 months. That did irreparable damage to my spine and, bladder, kidney. I've got all 3 ladders or all 3 levels of my spine. And, so very, very long story short, I was a victim of VA medical malpractice, which destroyed my financial future and really my life for a very long period of time. And then not only did they get me with the VA medical malpractice, but they also got me with legal malpractice and denied my claim for compensation for the injuries that happened on their watch on a legal loophole. And so that's when I began to take action and stand up for the good of the country, draft my own legislation, and delivered it to the very steps of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., where our laws are made, and have been lobbying and effectively advocating in the veteran community ever since. And that's been since about late 2017. Since I've had 5 bills introduced in Congress, one has been law, and I'm looking at having law number 2 here very soon.
Absolutely blows my mind, really, that you went from, you were in the Marines, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Being in the Marines, and then you were working with your hands, right? You were a heavy, you were not a desk jockey.
Right. Yeah. I owned as a civilian, I owned a custom landscape company.
Right.
And yeah. Mm-hmm.
With hardscape and all that. So, I mean, you were actually, working hard your whole life up until the VA decided to give you Tylenol and send you on your way.
Yeah,
Right?
I mean, well, not just Tylenol, but hardcore opioids. Double shots of
Yeah. Okay.
Dilaudid here and there. I was taking gabapentin and everything else in between. Yeah, a ton of opioids, and yeah, it was very bad. They failed to do any.
But
I'm sorry.
the problem was they didn't do any testing.
Yeah, they
Correct?
failed to do any diagnostic testing. They did an X-ray, said I was fine. Go home, stretch, and you'll be fine in a couple of weeks. And I just started to deteriorate, and I was completely incapacitated. I was doing everything that I could from my chair. But here I am living this life. Every 4 to 6 hours with handfuls of pills that my wife would just be feeding me. And she thought she was doing everything right. And doctors are telling her that, keep doing what you're doing. She didn't ask a whole lot of questions. She's like, okay, yeah, I'm going to make sure I'm going to continue to do everything that I'm being told and, prescribed. And, again, very long story short, by the grace of God, it's a miracle that I even survived more than 10 days of what I was going through, let alone to survive 4 months,
Wow.
on what they found on April 30th of 2016.
Okay. Well,
Wow.
thank you for recapping that story. I'm thinking that when we publish, we're going to have a rerun of your story, a rerun of Mark's story, and a rerun of Kristal's story prior to, so that everybody has a lead up. But thank you very much for sharing that. And you already explained that the result of this is you became a legislator of types. And I mean, hooah, absolutely hooah.
Yeah,
Excellent.
again, if I could just touch on one thing here, yeah, it's my book. I didn't choose this job; it chose me. And when you say legislator, yeah, again, people want me to run for Congress and all that stuff, and yeah, and it's a hard no. But
Oh, okay. All
I
right. All
I
right.
I've done yeah, I've done the job for long enough, and yeah, and it's definitely not for me. But I continue. I'm more effective on the advocacy side than I would ever be as a member. Because yeah, that's just
You found your calling.
yeah, boy.
Yeah, to add to what you just said, I spent 15 years in theater, um, and I saw I'm interfacing with the soldiers every day that they were handing out SSRIs like candy. Like 80% of them were on SSRI to help them deal with antidepressants. Um,
Wow.
and
Interesting to hear that.
So
Yes.
for our listeners, what is SSRI?
it's an antidepressant, sustained serotonin uptake inhibitor. I think it's what I'm not a
Yeah,
doctor.
right,
It's
right.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
But it is for mental illness.
It's for antidepressant for depression. And when I saw that, it
Right.
sent me aback.
Mhm.
They they were like, handing them out like candy, to get these soldiers to deal with their everyday. And I'm on the
Yeah.
chow hall
Yeah.
talking with these guys, gals every day.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's a bit of information that we'd never heard before. We're going to move on and ask Kristal a couple of questions here. Kristal, how has your journey with fibromyalgia influenced your advocacy work in the VA system?
Well, it was the major springboard for me founding Veteran Voices for Fibromyalgia because there wasn't anything really for myself. I live outside of Cleveland, Ohio. So I actually live what is dubbed as a medical mart because I have access to nationally established private healthcare systems from Cleveland Clinic, Mount Sinai, university hospitals, Metro Health. And I I had a very difficult time getting a provider at the VA to listen And interestingly, to piggyback off of Mark and SSRIs, while those are antidepressant medications, but they're also used off-label as well and prescribed for pain conditions, including fibromyalgia. And so
Oh,
when the VA was finally like, "Okay, we believe you have fibromyalgia and chronic pain, and we're gonna prescribe you an SSRI." I can't even remember. I It turns out I'm allergic to SSRIs, and then another medication class of medications they'll use for fibromyalgia and other pain conditions like neuropathy, it's common to be prescribed, is anti-seizure medications. And I had
okay.
experienced, serious rare side effects of those meds, and I had to go to the ER. And in the interim, the VA was like, and I had to go to private healthcare for the ER and everything. In the interim, the VA is like, well, there's nothing else we can do. And I was kind of like, okay, well, how about pull therapy? How about physical therapy? How about chiropractic care? How about pain management? And at the time, this was like 2013, 2014. So the VA really wasn't very gung ho on um referring.
Alternative therapies
Well,
or
they didn't have chiropractic care at the time back then,
right,
and
right.
they did offer pull therapy because the Cleveland VA has a pull and whatnot, but I had to fight to, like, get into physical therapy and see specialists, and I finally, after a couple of years with the VA, I was like, "You know what?" At the time, I was married, so I was able to utilize my husband's healthcare insurance provided through his employer, and within months accessing private healthcare systems, one of the things I realized was, again, this is not universal to everybody. It's based on where I live and having easy access to a variety of medical systems and specialists. But literally within a matter of months, I was seen by a neurologist, a functional medicine doctor, a pain management specialist, a rheumatologist, and physical therapy within 3 or 4 months. But I had been dealing with the VA for over 2 years and getting nowhere, and it was really that experience of here I am a veteran, they're supposed to provide me care, and if they can't, at the time we didn't have the Mission Act. We didn't even have there was another one before the Mission Act. We didn't It was very, very difficult. It's difficult now, but it was 100 times more difficult to get the VA to refer you to community healthcare. So my experience was, okay, this is an invisible illness. The VA does not have resources or uh, treatment modalities to offer veterans. I had to go to private
Mhm.
healthcare what my insurance didn't pay for. I had to pay for. And so I start advocating that, hey, we need more resources. And if we don't have the specialists at the VA, we need to get the GPs, the PAs, and the primary care doctors up to speed about fibromyalgia and some of these other illnesses, which, due to a lot of advocacy through the expansion of the PACT Act, are now, if you've served in certain regions or circumstances, are considered presumptive conditions, and some of those conditions are, along with fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, irritable bowel syndrome. A lot of these medical conditions we see coexisting with fibromyalgia. And so that's kind of, my personal battle, really, and my experiences, it parlayed into, okay, there's these options that I have access to in Cleveland, Ohio, including infusion treatments, which even at that time, there wasn't many pain management doctors that were prescribing infusion, intravenous treatments for fibromyalgia or irretractable chronic pain, and they were designated for patients who were diagnosed with severe treatment-resistant fibromyalgia, which I was diagnosed with. And these infusions included ketamine, lidocaine, Toradol, and propanol. And I was getting those for numerous years. And finally, like in 2018, the VA pain management clinic kind of got wind of these treatments, and there was actually a pain management doctor at my Cleveland VA that knew about the treatments because they worked at the facility that offered them previously. So I was like, okay, doctor, then you need to advocate that we bring this treatment here. You have experience with it. You prescribed it in the private healthcare system. There's all this research on it. And the problem is doctors and medical providers and healthcare workers at the VA, they're really afraid to kind of stand up and advocate and say, hey, I have experience with this treatment protocol for this said condition. And so it puts it back on the veteran, it puts it back on the patient. And so I'm the type of person, some of my background is I had worked in healthcare and social services and human services and mental health. And I did a lot of advocacy for the patients. Even one of my job titles was adult advocacy coordinator, and another one was benefits specialist coordinator. And I was sitting here like, if I'm having all these problems with the VA and I have the skill sets, knowledge, and connections to circumvent some of these things, along with have access to private healthcare. But what's happening to all these other veterans who don't know their patient rights, who don't know how to advocate for themselves, who don't know about treatments that are available in the private sector? And that just kind of was a culmination of things going, okay.
So is that pretty much what inspired you to establish the Veteran Voices for
Yes, I was
fibromyalgia?
already established in 2014 under my pen handle blogger name, the Fibromyalgia Pain Chronicles. But there was no space for veterans. And so a lot of them were following me through there because they're like, hey, there's this veteran and she's really, for lack of a better term, an outspoken advocate. And and that everything just kind of springboard when I was just like, this isn't acceptable care. This is actually slow care is no care at the VA or any healthcare system. And that's when I parlayed into the Veteran Voices for Fibromyalgia, but really getting into the legislative advocacy piece of it. Um, from things like getting, advocating for the expansion of the PACT Act, which was signed into law in 2022. Brian Talley and I have a history together of advocating for legislation. Other things like the failure of the VA's delivery of telehealth medical services to veterans. So while I am focused on fibromyalgia, if any other outlining entities or variables affect the veteran community, including those with fibromyalgia, uh, I'm kind of steamrolling ahead and taking the bull by the horns and saying, hey, we need to address this. And I'm also a huge advocate and voice for women veterans and working on initiatives to get their voices amplified and my team members. I can't say it's just me. I have a lot of team leaders and a lot of team members
Mhm.
who fill in because I'm only one person, or they have areas of expertise that I don't have, or they have skill sets that while I might be able to do it, I don't have time. And they fill in. They're going to DC, they're calling their representatives on different issues that I'm like, hey, this is a problem. We need to address it. I'm not seeing these major national nonprofit veteran specific organizations picking it up. You're not hearing the DAV or American Legion advocating legislation for fibromyalgia, not too much for women's veterans, not too much as far as treatment protocols. So that's kind of the space that myself and everyone at VVFF has filled and said, hey, we're here too. And there's a lot of us. There's about 1 million veterans that we know of that are diagnosed with fibromyalgia. So that's it in a
Wow.
nutshell.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, that
John,
is.
I think Crystal nailed it right
I don't
there.
even know.
I love
In
that.
that, the VA's ability acceptance to alternative treatment. You know, my experiential exposure, I I had sciatica at 20 after all that workout and after graduation at dive school.
Sure.
I had
Right.
I was moving some scuba bottles from one boat to another. Boom! It just hit me. I was like, wow. And go to the Navy doctors and they say, or take Motrin, work it off, 2 or 3 days bed rest, whatever. It wasn't until I was working with the teams and they stopped for sports injuries. Now Now they have sports injuries doctors, on the team. Back then, I had to
Gotcha.
go outside. I had to go to a chiropractor. That's why I'm a firm believer in chiropractors, because had I not had that early on, and the the U.S. military did not accept that, and I think the whole point of this is the inability for, because the VA is all mainstream, so whatever mainstream doctors say, whatever, they don't want to look into alternative, anything is, you know outside of their realm. And, had
Right.
I not gone through a chiropractor, I probably would have finished my career, because I wouldn't know how to deal with it.
We're seeing some movement through advocacy efforts from a variety of veteran organizations, both small and large, where now there's things that are covered under VA that's considered, I don't even like saying alternative because it's your whole health matters.
Yes.
So massage.
So I don't mean to interrupt, but I mean, from everything you guys are talking about, and I did not serve in the military, but from what you guys are talking about, it seems like everything that they were doing fell within the realm of whatever was inside
Mhm.
their box. And now it seems like some of the medicines or therapies are outside that box. Would that be a
They
correct
are
statement?
so at one point, they didn't even have chiropractors at my VA, which is Cleveland VA, which is, I think, the 5th largest VA healthcare system. 5th, 3rd, 5th, I don't know. It's one of the bigger ones. Massage therapy, you can get covered if you meet the criteria for it, but I think it's only 30 minutes. I've known some veterans who were able to get, that piercing for migraines, the death piercing. The other thing is under the past couple of years, we've seen a push of getting funding allocated for even other treatment options that are out there that are not typical but atypical, like psychedelics, i.e., mushrooms for veterans who are
Hmm.
really struggling with PTSD. The thing of it is once we start moving towards different modalities, I don't like to say alternative treatments, but different modalities, if there's no base foundation of research for it, then the research needs to be done. And then what happens is we kind of see this fight like, oh, should it go through the National Institutes of Health or should it go through the VA? And I'm like, veterans have very specific variables that don't exist in civilians. Like, it's not typical for a civilian to have like burn pit exposure or sarin gas exposure or toxic particulate exposure in developing like Gulf era war illnesses or Iraq, Afghanistan related service connected illnesses. So it really needs to go through the VA. And that's one of the things through advocacy is making sure that's highlighted like, hey, the typical person in the civilian sector is not going to have these variables as veterans do. And this is why this research needs to be done at the VA and the funding shifted for specific groups. And that, also parlays into like my organization, other organizations, like providing resources, supports, information about these research studies, who to call as far as Congress and Senate. Um, like when it comes up for funding for research or legislation, who to call to advocate that that legislation's passed or more robust funding is provided to the VA. And I know for myself, providing resources to veterans and how to be a proactive uh, patient advocate and knowing what your patient rights are, which are federally protected and then adopted by each state under state revised codes. So, some of the problems with the VA is the veterans don't know their patient rights. And to be honest, I've had conversations with providers at the VA and they don't even know patient rights. And I was like, okay, this needs to be legislation where they have annual training on what all of our 26 patient rights are. So they ensure that they're not inadvertently, unknowingly violating those. Because it's very common for the VA to deny a veteran a referral or consult to a rheumatologist or pain management and I've had so many of those issues. Like with my neck, it took 19 months from start to finish of advocating to
Wow.
get that cervical spinal surgery I needed. And I think, Lita, if you remember, I was so bad with the migraines because my discs were pressing on my spinal cord so bad I was having spinal fluid leak and I was having really awesome migraines like every day. And that took 9
So the problems that you
Mhm.
found basically are that the VA does not believe, like Ron was saying, they don't believe in just expanding their horizon and adding extra treatments or services for veterans. And veterans don't know that it's their right to push for those. Is that
Right.
right?
So, like under patient rights, protections, you have the right to appropriate and timely treatment. And that includes labs, that includes referrals for consult. We have the right to have accessibility to that when it's appropriate. I mean, there are times where it might not be. But in my case with my
Okay.
neck, they fought me and fought me and fought me and fought me. And it led to me filing a formal
Okay.
patient rights complaint when it was discovered that I did in fact it's life-threatening when your discs are pressing on your spinal cord. And
Sure. Sure.
that
Absolutely.
doctor, which was a primary care physician who kept refusing to order an MRI, and I had X-ray images that showed it was so bad that it said, like, "Abnormal result, consult needed, further." She ignored it, and I was like, "Okay, excuse me, mm-mm." I'm like, "Okay, you don't know." I'm like, "I just turned into veteran patient to your worst nightmare because here comes Kristal Kent, the patient advocate." She's no longer working at the VA. She was let go because that was a situation where I had heavily documented, I had put it in writing to the patient representative and sent it via email and copied the veteran and military relations liaison at my congressman's office at the time.
Hmm.
And I started
But Crystal, the normal, I'm going to say the normal, the everyday average veteran does not even know where to
exactly.
begin
And
to
the
do
VA
what you have
doesn't
done.
provide them the information on what their patient rights are. And most of the providers and healthcare workers don't know what patient rights are. And then as an organization and as a patient advocate and under my pen handle blogger name, the Fibromyalgia Pain Chronicles, I review patient rights, federally protected patient rights all the time. Tips on ways to protect your rights, to proactively advocate for yourself. So, yeah, it's kind of a twofold of legislative advocacy and education of both veterans and civilians living with a plethora of chronic conditions. But yeah, that's the problem.
Sure,
It's
sure.
put on us, the veterans, to push to get what we need. And we have already so many barriers from physical health,
Yeah,
mental health, accessibility to VAs, like people that live in rural areas or don't have transportation.
right.
Because well,
Okay, so
Crystal was,
Mark, okay.
yeah, because it's amazing, and I don't know if amazing is a good word to use, but what you're talking about, Crystal, with that dysfunction. But and I know we crept out with Mark a little earlier with his audio, and for the listeners, I mean, this is one of the first times we've had multiple guests on here simultaneously, so bouncing back and forth, it might be a little confusing, and I would apologize for that. But you were talking, Crystal, about the VA system, and I was interested hearing from Mark. Challenges did you face after being released from captivity? What challenges did you face trying to reintegrate
Um,
into the VA system?
not just integrating into the VA system, but just reintegrating into life. 32 months of captivity. And 6 months into it, I knew I lost everything. Everything I built in my life was gone. And it was just a matter of coming out of it, regrouping, reestablishing. Um, yeah, I'm self-made, so I lost it, but I know how to get it back. Um, but wow, it was very difficult.
it took me a year just to get back up to a year and a half to get back up to my fighting weight. I was 165 when I went in, 130 when I got out, and it took me like another year. I mean, I didn't have an appetite. I couldn't sleep. 32 months of torture. It takes a little bit of time to come out of it. But, I was pretty much on my own mentally. I mean, they prescribe just like doctors and all this other stuff, but there's no box to check. You know, I was talking to these guys, and
Right,
they
right.
don't even know what I'm saying. And you mentioned earlier about CPOD or COPD, whatever it is. I was exposed to burning plastics in burn pits because they were burning the water bottle, and that was just a regular thing. But a lot of you guys come out of it, and just has been indicated earlier, where do you go? Where do you go when they say, "Oh no, we can't help you"? And it's good to have advocacy groups that that can help you through that stuff. And I'm doing everything I can just to keep these families from taking themselves out every day. The numbers, it's
Mhm.
Yes.
the government should feel disgusted. They really should. That they're not, that they bring these young men and women in, myself included, into a wartime environment, and then expect us to come back from it unscathed. We see, pardon my
Right.
German, shit that most people do not see. Exposed. Yeah.
I thought that was
I'm
French.
German. Yeah, it's like, wow. I I say an easy time coming out of it. Easier time than I interfaced with these guys every day at the VA. I perform magic in the waiting room, so I interface with these guys. I do this perform. I talk to them, and I explain my situation. They explain their situation, and most of their situations are way worse than mine. And
Well, what problems did you see that they were going through that you didn't have to go through?
the referral process, for one thing. Okay, I applied for VA disability. Was awarded it. You go through the VA process, and then a second opinion is required. Okay, here's a silly story. My name was on file with VA in two different names, Mark Frerichs and Mark Frerichs. So no, it's just when I signed up in 2000 and when I came back, apparently they thought I was a new person. So
Wow.
Don't they go with social security numbers?
that's what I thought. Um, I mean,
It would make too much
Hold
sense.
on. Kristal, any ideas here?
So sounds like a very big human error on someone on the VA's part, but your military ID and your social security number should be suffice to identify the duplication. But I
Who
could
you
tell
are?
you that
Right,
right.
right.
my
Okay.
medical board people.
But when it goes into disability, now you're dealing with second opinion. You're dealing with a separate system. Um, so what ended up happening was I was getting duplicate appointments for the follow up on the eyes, follow up on the nose, follow up on the ears. I was getting duplicate appointments that the system did not pick up on. So they're telling me, well, we're going to deny your disability because you didn't make your appointment. It's like, well, no, I made my appointment.
Oh my
So
God.
every time I figured it out, and I already figured it out on my own. It's like, why are you telling me I'm missing a appointment? Nobody can figure it out. It wasn't until I looked at documents and I said, wow, this one's got my middle initial in it. This one does not. I'm two different people in the system. And
Wow.
That's crazy.
yeah, I mean,
That's
hopefully it doesn't happen to
insane.
anybody else. But they were going to deny my claim because I didn't make my appointment, and I have proof that I made my appointment. Just it's a simple glitch in the system. I mean, expect anything. Expect anything. Yeah.
Your case isn't the
Okay,
first
okay.
I've heard where someone's been in this system twice with a very like kind of sleight of hand typo. And I think Brian, you've heard of it too, have you not? Where you've come across veterans, they've had it's like they have a duplicate identity in the VA electronic records.
No, I
Wow.
haven't.
Oh,
That's
So
incredible. Yeah.
I don't hope to not open up a can of worms with this question, but is what you guys are talking about? It's a simple fix. I'm assuming. Is that something that's part should be a simple fix? Let's put it that way. Is that part of something that's supposed to be being done with the VA
so
overhaul?
one of my team leaders, a new data, she's like my expert go-to for like systems, data, and networking, and also a couple of my other contacts. So there have been you know, we could talk about all the things that the VA is not doing, but one of the things they have been doing is updating their telehealth medical services. Their electronic
Mm-hmm.
records where they can now see some of the records if you are outsourced or if you go to an ER or you see private healthcare doctors and have an MRI done, they can see that stuff where even a couple of years ago, my VA couldn't do that. And they're updating it
You're right. You're right.
to be more efficient, but also catching those like glitches with Mark and some of these other things. But the problem is that they can't roll it out all at once. I mean, essentially, it would cause chaos if you rolled out all the updates all at once across every single VA medical facility. And you would have more people calling IT and freaking out when all these little bugs and glitches come up. So there's certain
Yeah.
what happens with the VA, from my understanding, the way it's been explained to me by a news that, and a couple of the individuals on the tech team, the national tech team and regional tech team, when I was addressing the telehealth issues, is that they roll it out slowly. And I know, like, where I'm at, we were one of the first to get, like, the electronic records update where there's more transparency between, like, looking at your medical records, and let's say they outsourced me to Cleveland Clinic, and then they can see that and what some people don't realize in the private healthcare sector, a very popular program is called Epic. And a lot of your private healthcare systems use
Mm-hmm.
this electronic like networking system, and they can communicate with other hospital systems. And so we're seeing
Right.
the VA rolling that out and being initiated, but they can't do it all at once. And they kind of hit like a bigger
Okay.
healthcare system and then they'll roll it out at a smaller one. And essentially, like I said, it's introducing all of it all at once would cause chaos. It would. And you'd probably have a week of like
Sure.
the VA and veterans, even longer, kind of losing our doggone minds because you have a limited amount of tech support to address all the bugs and glitches as the systems roll out. So it wouldn't make sense to roll it all at once. Now, does that mean it's going to be
Right.
perfect?
Right.
Absolutely not. Is there going to be a need for improvement in the future? Absolutely, for sure. Um, because tech does fail, that is just a given, but it's more of an approach, especially through advocacy and kind of reframing our thinking around at least the electronic and telehealth and data systems electronically, like our records, is this happens, we gotta reframe it and not be like, "Hey, let's fix this. VA, do your job," but, "Hey, I'm a veteran and I identified this issue or I'm having this problem. Let's partner together to fix it," or get on the radar, or even something as simple as retraining staff when an error comes up that they're coding it correctly so it can get fixed more promptly, because sometimes human user error is the issue.
Crystal, do you think protection of privacy is also an issue? And when records go from one doctor to another, from one entity to another, and it's siloed information. It's limited access information. Do you think that our need for privacy within our own doctor community is a holdup? I mean, it seems to me like it is. Like some doctors know my background, some don't. They only have limited. I talk to doctors. It's like, oh, do you have my schedule in front of you? No, I don't have access to that. They all have specific siloed information that they have access to, and
But Mark, don't you think that it would make a more comprehensive health care if all the doctors could talk to each other? Because you've already given each one your permission
right,
to take care of you and to
right,
do whatever is best for you. I have no problem with my civilian doctor speaking with my VA doctor, for instance. They can share whatever they need, because if it helps to me to get healed, that's what I want.
There's a little caveat here as well, because you're touching upon HIPAA, the Health Information Personal Protection Act, and so many people get this wrong. So I can't remember, it was under President Obama's administration where HIPAA was updated because, and I worked in mental health, and we'd have these problems where a patient of ours would go to the emergency room, be hospitalized, would tell us they were, but wouldn't like release the information. But then we come to find there's all these instances, and this isn't just from my personal experience, but in healthcare as general, like it interfered with continuity of care. So I'll give you an example of, especially if the VA outsources you, they have every right to speak, communicate with that provider, but you also have right within
Correct.
the teams that you're assigned to. Now, um, if some random rheumatologist was like, "Hey, I want to know more about Mark, Crystal, Brian, or Lita," for no reason, and you're not assigned to that provider, there's no reason for it. Your providers can actually go in
No,
the
right.
VA and see all your upcoming appointments with all of your providers within that system. Um, so HIPAA was amended a little bit to include that continuity of care and communication between providers, because there were such big silos and it was actually harming patients. And we would have like providers, like provider A prescribing this med, and then provider B, because they weren't communicating, it was creating like a health crisis because of the medications. And if the
Right.
pharmacist didn't catch the prescriptions, and the thing of it is, it could be, oh, a veteran got this med prescribed by Dr. A in the VA, and the VA pharmacy filled it, but then they saw their private doctor and they got this medication filled and they went to a private pharmacy. And that can lead to some serious consequences, up to including death if there's a major interaction. So when it comes to continuity of care, uh, they can communicate. They can see your appointments. Now, if some like family member or friend tried getting information about your overall health status, and this happens a lot. I see this a lot with veterans where a friend or a family member, they're calling the VA because they want to get information about like a veteran's mental health status. And the thing of it is, as a provider or support staff or healthcare worker, we can listen to their concerns. We can't disclose any information unless we have written consent from that veteran. So I've seen that at the VA where people will call, and I've seen it with even ex spouses and stuff, and that's a whole nother thing. So for continuity
Mhm.
of care reason, I'm just saying, I know like people will be calling saying their spouse or ex-spouse was veteran XYZ, and like they want these benefits. It's like that doesn't work that way, honey. Like, no. But that's like a whole for continuity of care and really for the health and safety of the patient so they don't have any adverse issues of conflicting medical care because providers can't communicate or see what's going on. That, yes, one doctor to another, if they're both treating that veteran or patient in the civilian sector, they can communicate. And for the VA, if they're outsourcing
Right.
us and they're paying for it, the federal government's like, hey, we're sending you
Yes. It's a
out.
given. It's a given, right? Hey, Brian, what systemic issues did you identify when you were in the VA, and how did that help you with your advocacy work?
I
Then?
mean, the issues were a 74-year VA legal loophole that the VA just sidestepped for generations. And I mean, it was a bulletproof law, and that's why it never really had any changes. It was very profitable. No,
Is
that's
that
for
the
active duty.
the Ferris Doctrine?
Yeah, the Ferris Doctrine is active
Oh,
duty,
okay.
and the law that, or what I was working with, only has to do with the veteran community, within the VA. But yeah, no, the VA
Okay.
sidestepped
Okay.
it.
I'm sorry.
Very,
Okay.
very bulletproof law. The systemic part would be the constant cherry picking of employees to find the independent contractors that were committing the wrongdoings to pen the malpractice or the negligence on them so the VA could see their way out of it. And all I needed to do is just find one of those that were directly connected with the veteran that filed the federal tort claim for damages, and that was their way out of it. So I mean, you talk about systemic. I mean, it was criminal, what they were running, and I brought that to light.
And okay, and then how did that change? How did that law help other veterans now in today's
Well, they can no
world?
longer hold on to crucial information. The VA has to come clean within 30
Okay.
days and give that whoever filled out that federal tort claim, everybody that is listed on the form, they need to have their employment status revealed to the injured veteran.
What is the percentages of contracted doctors and doctors that are actually paid by the VA or part of the VA?
So there's
Employed by the VA. Yeah.
about 62,000 independent contractors right now that are working within the halls and the walls of the VA, and those are the majority of the people that actually will cut on you, and are doing a lot of the surgeries, procedures, and all that stuff. So 400,000 VA employees, or that's at least where the Trump administration is going to get it down to, about 400,000. And so out of 400,000 total VA employees, and that includes the guys that are cleaning the toilets too, if they're employed by the VA police, bookkeepers, accountants, all that stuff, they all fall underneath that 400,000. So what a lot of people don't understand is that a lot of the people that are the ones responsible for doing a lot of the wrongdoing on veterans are independent contractors. And the VA had cleverly put that together because that's how they could see their way out of a lot of lawsuits. So basically, they treat them all just like a VA employee until they get hurt or until they cause a wrongdoing. And then once they do, the VA says, okay, cool. Yeah. So you're no longer a VA employee. You're an independent contractor. So we have different rules for you. So there's two sets of rules. There's one for the government, and then there's another one for the government. And the veteran ends up losing, when the deck is completely stacked against them. And so I came in and said, yeah, we're not going to do this anymore. You need to be transparent and accountable to those veterans that you hurt due to no fault of their own. So you can't just hold on to crucial information and run folks to state statute of limitations and then drop a bombshell when they have no leg to stand on and destroy everything that they've ever
Right.
worked so hard for in their life, their livelihoods, their jobs, their careers, their life savings. I mean everything.
Contractor accountability. That's what it's about. Yeah.
Yeah, and the majority of the folks in there are working in good faith. And my problem came with the attorneys on the 7th floor of the Office of General Counsel. Those are the guys that were working in bad faith with the veteran community, and those are the ones that were pinning all of the blame on certain employees that had certain clauses. And so Yeah, yeah. They were
Finding the
the ones that
loopholes.
knew how
Uh-huh.
to cleverly put everything into action. And these clinicians and doctors, they don't know what's going on. They have no idea what's going on. All that stuff's being directed from Washington,
That's
D.C.
a shame.
Like I said, at the VA headquarters. And, I mean, look how many VAs we have, across the country. And they don't talk to each other. Every single VA in this country is independently ran. And so you can't go from one VA and then go to another VA and see exactly what you got. Literally, it's insane. I've been to the VA in Loma Linda in California. That's the one that nearly killed me. And the VA here now in Houston, anything that I've had previously done at the VA Loma Linda, they cannot see at VA Houston. So I have to tell them what what this and that. Now they have my records because my records transferred, but they can't just go on the computer and say, "Oh yeah, back in 2016, you saw this doctor and blah blah blah." Like literally, like it's the strangest thing. And the Office of General Counsel, they stated that they can't just put in a employee's name or an independent contractor's name to get their employment status because all that's concealed as well. So I mean it's just full of lies
Hmm.
and stuff like that.
Okay.
But that whole communicating thing though is
Well,
I think it's real. Like they can't, because when I was sitting in a VA Houston hospital, I had 3 doctors in there that were like really trying to find some records on me so they could make a good decision on the MRI and the CT scan that they were looking at, just to look at the degeneration that has taken place over the years. And they were doing everything that they possibly can. And they're like, yeah, we cannot get in there. And this is a VA hospital, one of the largest ones in the country, can't speak and communicate with another VA hospital via internet, getting online and pulling records. So they had to request them from Loma Linda to be emailed to, yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Right, from state to state, they can't
so,
communicate, and when you said, like, Lita, when you're asking about systemic issues, it breaks down to this, is that
right.
human error causes,
Yeah.
strife for veterans, patient rights issues cause strife for veterans, healthcare policy and legality protecting the VA causes issues for veterans. The inability to communicate between VA facilities, as far as being able to see your records if you're in one state and you move to another, uh, my understanding, again, if you ever wanna do a podcast on the data and electronic and all that technology stuff, I'd pull in a new data on that, because she's the expert. She explains it to me, and I'm just giving it layman's terms. But my understanding is there should be some
Okay.
more, kinda copacetic streamlining between the states, but it's every, like, VA in a particular state, it's like they're their own island, right? So the communication is
Okay.
a systemic
So
issue, and
here's
it
here.
puts
wh-
everything on the veteran to solve every single systemic issue they face within the system. And my whole thing is this: we spend trillions of dollars sending people, uh, employing them in the military, sending them on peace missions, humanitarian missions, medical missions, and war. And they can invest billions of dollars to fix some of these copacetic issues that are happening, like the communication or education of the doctors on patient rights, providing, uh, when I go to a civilian doctor every year, they're like, here's a snapshot of your HIPAA rights and your patient rights, and you sign off on it. But at the VA, I can't remember. Patient rights are supposed to be hung in a non-conspicuous place in medical facilities. And what it comes down to is all these things at all these different sections of the VA that the VA should be doing very well, they're not. And then it places the burden on the veteran to address every single issue. We've all had multiple issues. And then they're wondering why the suicide rates are so high. It's like you have a sick veteran who's also struggling with PTSD, who might be marginalized because of the color of their skin, their gender, um, religion, how they identify. They have all these barriers coming in, which reduces their equitable access to healthcare. And then you're doing all these things, not necessarily intentionally, but not going out of your way to ensure you're reducing the likelihood of these systemic issues happening on such a broad stroke to all the veterans. And then what it happens is we as veterans, we try to reach out to other veteran organizations. If they don't feel it's a big enough issue at the time, they don't pick it up as part of their legislative or awareness initiatives. So then you have kind of what you are seeing in the veteran community, because we were used to be called rogue veteran advocates, because we started our own independent legislative advocacy and patient advocacy for veterans, and then not incorporated, but developed organizations or platforms. And now what you're seeing is the Brian Tallies of the world, who from their own experience of medical negligence are on this. It developed this pathway of advocacy for them. And we're seeing more and more veterans like Brian Talley, myself, who are kind of creating smaller nonprofits or like a smaller platform, but really going in with some robust advocacy and getting these systemic issues addressed, because it's it's like you're putting the veterans through war again, having to battle every systemic issue
Right.
they faced at a VA, and then they move to a different state, and I've heard this from several veterans, move to a different state, and then they're in the same position Brian was, or other issues, and it's like they're starting from the ground up, having to do that and fight the same battle in a different facility, in a different state, and it just make sense.
All right, Kristal, before we wrap this up, what is one thing that you think is needed in the VA system to make change? Just one.
Woo! You know what? I think the simplest way is the VA needs to provide training to all staff that work in the VAs, required annual training of patient rights, understanding that, but also providing the resources and educational virtual like videos for veterans to learn, and veterans, because the veterans don't know what their rights are and how to navigate the system when a right has been violated. So providers need to know,
Right.
because some of them don't even know. I was like, "Oh yeah, this is a patient right violation when if it is reasonable to do a blood test because you've ruled out other things, you can't figure out what's wrong with this veteran, and they ask for a specific blood test or a referral to a specialist or an image, uh, when it is appropriate and you're denying that, and again, this is kind of more of a policy thing, like, there is sometimes the provider's hands are tied based on VA policy, because at the end of the day, the federal government wants to save money, but a lot of healthcare workers, admin support staff, uh, people that clean the facilities, the doctors, physician assistants, nurses, phlebotomists, they're not up to speed on what patient rights are. And I've heard providers
Okay.
and admin staff speaking in a negative light about a veteran in front of their face in a waiting area. And I was like, "How can you blatantly
Okay.
just that's a major pa." I walked down to the patient advocate office. I said, "You need to go over there and you need to fix this because I'm gonna start recording it." Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Hey, Mark, same question to you. Give me one thing that you wish the VA would change and how it would help the veterans.
Paralleling with what Grissom said, we want privacy in America. Privacy. The Privacy Act, I think, is a hindrance because everyone's afraid that they're going to be called on the carpet with a lawsuit because they disclosed the wrong information to the wrong client or the wrong person. I think, we we did in the military. There's some stuff that's secret, some stuff top. You know, you got to put your CAD card in the machine before you can access the information. I I think that the de-siloing of information for the for the for the good of the patient. I just think we're just so wrapped up with bureaucracy, and everyone's afraid to say anything to anyone, to where the records are not being divulged to the right person. And I'm on board 100% with this. You know, if if you've got another doctor that you're taking care of from, and you're also using the VA system, it's important that they know what medications you're on. It's important that they collaborate, you know. And the other thing is communication with my primary. Like if I want to reschedule an appointment, I have to go through the switchboard, especially if like suddenly I can't get a ride, and you know their appointment's in 3 hours. It's very difficult, and most veterans don't want to stay on hold for 45 minutes just trying to change their appointment. So it's communication issue. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
yeah, it's a bureaucratic nightmare.
So get rid of some of the red tape, huh?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay. How about you, Brian? What changes would you recommend to enhance the VA system? What do you think would help?
Eliminating coughs, colds, runny noses, sinus infections, stomach bugs from going to the ER. We have clogged up the ER to the point to where folks like me are being sent home with bags of pills with directions to stretch because of the hundreds of veterans that are going there to be seen because they're too lazy to make an appointment with their primary care provider. Period. That's just it. Unless you have an emergency, you should not be in the emergency room. So I would
Okay.
make it easier. I would streamline it to where if you have a legitimate, like, hey, I got a cough, I got the sneezes and the stomach bugs and the viral infection. Yeah, I got all that stuff. Cool. Go see your primary care physician and we'll get you in. I think they should have a completely separate wing where they come in, they triage you, and they can get you all feeling better and right out the door again without clogging up emergency medicine, because emergency medicine was never intended to be used as a doctor's office for everyday. Yeah. So that's
Kind of like treat the GP wing as a minute clinic also.
Like create urgent cares within the VA, like walk-in clinics to get these things addressed. Because I know for myself, my doctor will say, my one, they didn't have any appointments for me to be seen, even though I have a history of developing chronic pneumonia, and they won't order an x-ray or order antibiotics. And then they say, well, go to the ER, go to the VA ER. So it's kind of like when you don't have access to healthcare, when you have these intermediate or, illnesses where you're sick, like with pneumonia or the flu, we don't have an urgent care or minute clinic to walk in to get the treatment. And then, yeah, sure, they go to the ER. And then sometimes they're being directed to the ER. So maybe that would be a problem solver if they provided telehealth, medical
Sure,
telehealth
sure.
after hours, or had walk in medical clinics for these issues so that these people, as Brian said, aren't overtaxing the emergency care systems
right.
within the VA.
and another thing too, what these veterans are doing, and they again, they don't want to spend on 45 minutes, an hour, 2 hours on hold to make an appointment with their primary care, and then they say, well, shit, we're 6 months out on seeing your doctor. Well, then they'll just say, I'll just go to the ER then, and I'll just tell them what's wrong. And then they can go in there and they could say, yeah, I'm feeling really bad. And then when they're in there, they can do it all. Oh, yeah, and I need this, prescription refilled. Oh, yeah, being that I'm here, let's just do this too. And it ends up being like, hey, I'm going to jump the line and I'm going to go directly into the ER, but I'm also going to be taking resources away from veterans that actually need true emergency care while you're in there taking up a slot. I mean, I don't know. There's just a lot of
that
things I know
makes
about
sense.
it.
It makes sense. Well,
That's a very universal approach. So what I would opinion that with is we need the VA to invest funding to research how many times veterans are going to the ER for non-emergency reasons. And then that response, if it's high enough, would be justifiable to develop walk-in
absolutely.
clinics.
Well, I'm gonna end it today, and I'm gonna put this in all of your laps because you're all so basically out of this world with qualifications, and you can make this happen. I know you can. The three of you putting your heads together can make change, and I appreciate the time that you took out to talk with us, the time that you take every day to make the VA a better place for all of us. And let's take a little bit of time and tell our listening audience, Brian, how can people reach out to you if they'd like to?
I have a website, briantally.com, BRIANTALLY.com.
We'll put a link. And Kristal, how about you?
I also have a website, www.veteranvoices4fibromyalgia, and you can find me on social media either under the Fibromyalgia Pain Chronicles or Veteran Voices for Fibromyalgia on pretty much almost all social media platforms. So
Thank you so much.
And Mark, you and I were talking before. You have a Netflix show coming out soon.
I don't have any website or
Um,
anything. I try and keep a low profile.
You will.
I made a lot of former enemies
Yeah, but can you tell?
when I was working overseas. I keep a low profile. The Netflix thing coming out. It's been 2 years in the negotiation. And it's not about me. It's going to be about what we just talked about. In to a certain extent. What just happened over the last.
All right. Well, we'll definitely when we find out. Excuse me. When we find out when that releases, we will definitely put a link on our website, and we'll send the word out for you. Well, thank you all for sharing your experiences and insights. Your contributions are invaluable to our listeners and to our audience. We hope this discussion sheds some light on the challenges within the VA system, and it inspires some action. That's all we have for today.
Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment, and before undertaking a new healthcare regime. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard on this podcast.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of PodcastDX.
Stay healthy and stay informed.
Till next week.